tonight, good evening, everyone. Tonight, we're very happy and honored to introduce our speaker, who is Professor Lauren Bausch. She's an assistant professor at Dharma Realm Buddhist University, where she teaches Sanskrit, Indian classics, and Buddhism. A specialist in the Brahmana texts, she also investigates the relationship between Vedic tradition and early Indian Buddhism. She is the editor of Self-Sacrifice and Cosmos, Vedic Thought, Ritual, and Philosophy, published in 2019, and author of various other articles on Indian philosophy. She completed her PhD in Sanskrit at the University of California in 2015, and we're very happy to introduce her, invite her tonight to speak. But first we'll have a short translation by Jing-Xing Su.
劳伦·宝希，法界大学副教授，教授梵文、印度经典和佛学课程。他是梵文专家，并对吠陀传统与早期印度佛教的关系有研究。他担任了自我、奉献和宇宙体系、吠陀思想、仪轨和哲学的编辑工作。2019年，并发表了《古居萨罗国堪瓦婆罗门教与佛教徒》、离句吠陀的语言之哲学和吠陀文本中的双重种姓制度等文章。2015年，他获得加州大学伯克利分校南亚与东南亚研究系博士学位。
Okay, so welcome, Lauren. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. All Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, the Venerable Master, Dharma Masters, and Dharma Friends. Namo Namaha.
诸佛菩萨、深宫上人、各位法师、各位法友，你们好。
My topic to discuss with you this evening is false thoughts according to the Śāstras. They say, you should pick a Dharma talk that you're familiar with, something that you have a lot of direct experience with. And this is definitely something I know pretty well. In fact, it may be the only thing that I know. When I first came to Berkeley Buddhist Monastery many years ago, this phrase, false thoughts, it was very often heard in the lecture hall. And initially I thought, if there are false thoughts that we're supposed to get rid of, then there must be true thoughts that, we need to find and cultivate. But I'd like to pose the question tonight. Are all of our thoughts false?
他们说讲法要找一个你熟悉的话题，并且要找一个你有直接经验的。我想妄想这个可能是我所知道的唯一的一个。就在我很多年前去伯克莱上寺的时候，我常常听到这个词妄想。那个时候我就在想，如果有一个妄，那是不是表示我们也有一个真的想？那我是不是要找到真想，并且来修行？所以这也是我今天晚上要提出的一个问题。我们所有的想法都是虚妄的吗？
At Dharma Realm Buddhist University, we very often begin class with a contemplative exercise. And I'd like to do that tonight as well. And just take a couple of minutes for all of us to just observe our false thoughts.
在法大，我们很频繁的在每堂课开课之前，都会做一个观想练习，就是花几分钟来 观赏我们的想法，观察我们的妄想。
Some of you might be asking, what on earth am I looking for? What is this false thought that I'm supposed to observe? So that's the rest of the lecture, should hopefully clarify that somewhat. False thought is the English that I first heard, but the Chinese, there are a couple of different, I guess, Chinese phrases that can be translated as false thought. One is 妄想, meaning false thought, a conceptualization or deluded thinking, or 妄念, false thought, a deluded mind. In Sanskrit, there are also, more than one way of saying what this false thought means. One is vikalpa, and this is some kind of a concept, but very specifically, it's a kind of discursive thinking that will separate something that is to be grasped, some kind of object, and something that is perceiving. And the second way that you can express this in Sanskrit is abhuta parikalpa. And this could be translated as conceptualization of the unreal, false imagining, or an illusion in regards to what does not exist. So I will be discussing these terms, the Sanskrit terms, as well as a few other key terms that will help make sense of vikalpa and abhuta parikalpa.
有人就会问，我在这个地球上到底是在寻找什么？到底有什么样的妄想我要来观察呢？在英文当中，妄想，就是 false thought， 然后概念化或者是愚痴的想法， 在中文有很多，比如说妄想或者是妄念，在梵文当中，有2个词，一个是可以理解为 vakapa， 就是概念，另外一个是 parikapa， 就是把一个不是真的东西概念化，或者是虚妄的一种想象，不存在的一种东西。所以今天我就会从一些关键的梵文词，还有一些关于这个妄想的来展开讨论。
And maybe at this point, I'd like to thank Yihuan and Sarah, Feda, and Xiaojuan for their help with Chinese language, and also for Dharma Master Jin Shin for translating into Chinese tonight. It's really nice to hear your voice. And I'd like to thank Mattia Salvini for help with Sanskrit.
那我在这里还特别感谢石一环、Sarah， 还有 Feder， 还有舒小娟他们的中文帮助。
Okay, so I'll be dealing mainly with Śāstras sources, although the next slide has a quote from a sutra, sorry. But a Shastra is basically, it's any kind of a commentary or a treatise explaining some type of theme in Buddhist thought that is written specifically by an acharya, a teacher, and not a Buddha. But acharyas, in this context, are very learned, they're very erudite, and they're also advanced practitioners. So they are people who would have cultivated a lot and have seen in their own experience what they're discussing in the texts.
Śāstras 就是论藏，它有几重含义。第一个就是它是一种评论或者是论文，它不是佛说的，它是那些阿舍离，就是老师说的。当然，这些教授阿舍离他们本身是非常的博学，这些论藏就是来解释佛教的一些思想。然后这些论师他们本身是很资深的修道者，他们已经从他们自己的修行经验中看到这些。
Okay, so I'd like to recite a verse for you from the Lankavatara Sutra, and it goes like this. Chittamatram idam sarvam dvidha chittam pravartate grahya grahyaka, or start that again. Grahya grahaka bhavena atmatmiyam na vidyate. And that means all of this is merely mind. Matra chittam. Chitta matram. And the mind comes about as twofold, as something to be grasped and a grasper. But there's no self, nor anything belonging to self.
下面我就给大家念诵《楞伽经》中的一段偈颂。所有的这一切都只是心，这个心它是双重的，有一个能执，也有一个所执。但其实既没有一个我，也没有什么任何是属于这个我的东西。
So this verse is pointing to something, I think, fundamental to understanding false thoughts. And that is that the mind itself creates a kind of split within itself. It creates something that it can grasp onto as some kind of object that it misperceives as being separate from itself, when actually it's really just the mind itself. And this enables the mind to have this wonderful variegated experience of being separate, as being different, as having something to observe, when in fact it's all just mind.
这个偈颂可以帮助我们很好的理解妄想。我们的心 他自己就分开了 separate 了一个能执和所执，他创造了一个这样的对象，让我们有所执着，但其实都只是心本身的作用。这种分割感就是有了一个观察的对象和所观察的。
So the mind itself, it has to not know itself in order to affect this split. It has to have some kind of ignorance, some kind of not knowing, even forgetting of who it or what it really is. And this not knowing allows the mind to misperceive itself as a self and other.
因为我们的心不自知，就是因为有种种的妄想，所以这个心它不认得自己，因为这种不认得，然后这个心就创造了一种分割感。
So we'll see that avidya or ignorance is the first of the 12 links, pratitya samutpada, dependent arising. And I just want to look at the first three with you this evening. So it starts off with ignorance, with this not knowing itself as it really is, with a kind of forgetting itself so it can know itself differently. And that enables the mind to create the samskaras, these conditioning factors that will allow it to have consciousness of something. So these first three are very fundamental that to set in motion, you could say, a snowball effect. So from ignorance, from the mind not knowing itself, or pretending it to be otherwise, to creating all of these different conditioning factors that can then be used to create the experience of something apart from itself that really isn't separate.
那今天我就从12因缘的前3个重点开始讲，就是第一个是无明，第二个是行，第3个是识，识别的识。因为这个心他不知道自己的本来面目，或者是这个心他忘了他自己是什么样子的，从而这个心他就创造了种种的因缘，然后就让我们有一种经历。这就好像是那个雪板 snowboard 滑雪板滚雪球 snowboard， 然后呢这个心不知道自己，他就创造了种种的因缘，然后就有了种种的经验。
So chitta, we're talking about mind, but this word can also be translated as thought or even as consciousness. And this is kind of an important distinction to consider when we're reading translations, because all of these words can be used. But okay.
基塔这个词，它虽然说它是指心，但其实它也可以翻译为念头，甚至是意识。这个是一个很重要的分别，因为在翻译当中，这个词常常用到，但它可能会表示不同的意思。
So there are a few traits that kind of define what chitta is. First, the chitta, it cognizes an object. It always is conscious of some object. Second, the chitta itself is always accompanied by mental factors. So the chitta, you could think of, and the texts often describe it this way, as a king and his retinue. So the king will never be apart from his retinue. So this chitta, this mind that can be conscious of something, always has with it a number of different mental factors that influence what it's aware of. Another quality is that a chitta only lasts a moment, probably less than the way you think of a moment now. It's pretty infinitesimal. it's described that in the time it takes for lightning to strike or for you to blink your eye, billions of chittas stream through. I mean, it's lightning fast, really quick. And they always operate in a series. And every chitta is dependently arisen. Starting with that moment of ignorance, and it's creating these different mental factors, always dependently arisen.
那下面我们来看一下，有很多的特点可以来定义这个心。首先第一点，它总是有一个认知的对象，总是有一个对象。第二点，这个心它总是随着很多的心所一起作用，就好像一个国王，他总是有很多的眷属，心也是这样的，心王他会有很多的心所来影响他所觉知的这一切。然后第三点就是这个心它只能持续一小会儿，比如说在一眨眼的功夫就已经有成千万亿的这些妄念起来。第四点就是它这些妄念它是一系列运作的，是相联系的。第五个就是它这些心念的波动它是依缘而起的，比如说12因缘里面的只是有无明，然后就会有很多很多其他的心所以相续产生。
So a chitta, or a mind moment, is accompanied by any number of mental factors called chaita. And there are a few that are universal, meaning they are always present in every chitta. So according to Abhidharma, some of the universal chittas would be contact, sparsha, and in Buddhism, contact is defined by the coming together of the sense faculty, the sense object, and consciousness. Feeling, or vedana, which is pleasant, unpleasant, or neither. Notion, samshnya, this is kind of the mind looking for the attributes, the qualities, using language. So saying like, oh, this object has yellow or blue, something like that, long, short. And of course, volition, chaitana. So every chitta will be accompanied by these. And you can see that they are all going to be derived from past karma, from past actions. So you're getting a lot of old information in your present chitta.
下面我们看一下变形心所。变形心所就是说，它在我们每一个心念，它都会有这4个变形心所，就是它永远都是存在的。每一个心念都有这4个心所。第一个是触，触在佛教里面就是跟我们的感官，就是我们的五官有接触。然后第二个是受 feeling， 比如说舒服的和不舒服的。第三个就是想，就是你的心在想这个东西，然后第4个是思，然后这个东西是黄色的、蓝色的、长的、短的。每一个心念都有这4个心所相跟着，而这些呢都是跟我们从过去的业还有我们的行为所产生的。
In addition to these universal mental factors, you could have any number of other mental factors accompanying each chitta. And of course, all of these mental factors will influence how that object in the mind is understood. So this is a list taken from a comprehensive manual of Abhidhamma. This is based on Anuruddha's text. And you can see desire, or conceit, hatred, doubt, sloth, worry. Any of these would have an effect on the way that an object is understood.
这些是从阿毗达摩论里面的其他的一些心所，这些也都会影响我们的这个心念。比如说常常看到的第一个欲，然后还有贪婪、疑、等等。全部念 OK。比如说欲、痴、无惭、无愧、贪、邪见、慢、嗔、忌、恼、恨、懒惰、掉举、疑、性、念、惭、愧、不贪、不嗔、心中立、清安、慈悲、喜乐。
I had this image come to mind. I used to play with Legos when I was a kid. It's like if you could reach your hand into a box of Legos and pull out a handful, and then build something with it. So you want to build a house. Like you were limited by the number of Legos that you got from reaching your hand in the box. And something, you could build the house with those Legos, but then would you remember that they're actually just these individual blocks? Or would you think, oh, no, I have a house now. It's a house. It's a proper house. So I kind of think of the mental factors and the chitta in the sense of kind of just these little building blocks, that kind of limit our understanding, limit the mind in that moment to what we can actually perceive.
这张图片就是我常常，当我还是小孩子的时候，我常常会玩乐高积木。然后如果你只有这么多的乐高的积木，你能建什么？你能盖什么呢？我就拿这个乐高积木来盖房子。但是有的时候，你就是只是用有限的这些积木，然后来建这个房子。但是我们常常都忽略了，其实这只是每一个独立的一块小积木。可是你却会说，哦，不，我有一个房子。这个例子呢，就是可以帮助我们理解每一个独立的心所和这个心念，他们是怎么样建立的。然后我们对这个世界的看法，他们可以就是对我们的心产生一种什么样的限制和影响。
Another kind of example would be like thinking of chitta, like what appears on a screen. I'm looking at my computer using this nice Zoom application, and it looks like something like an image and a usable app, but actually what it is a bunch of code. I don't see the code. If I could actually see the chitta for what it is, it'd be like seeing the code behind the Zoom application, behind the images on my screen.
另外一个可以帮助我们理解这个心念的例子，就好像看这个屏幕上出现的这个图片，你以为它是一个投射的图片，但其实它不是，它只是一些代码而已。然后它只是一些代码而已。但是其实后面还是有一个电脑的程序。
I'd like to read a quote from Maitreya's Madhyanta Vibhaga, and it's Abhuta Parikalpascha Chitta Chaitaha. So, and conceptualization of the unreal, that was, remember, one of our translations for false thoughts, is mind, chitta, and mental factors, chaita. So we can think of this, false thoughts as mind and mental factors.
下面我要读一下弥勒菩萨的一个论，他就是说，这其实也是对妄想的解释，对这个不真实的东西的一种概念化，就是心和心所的同样的作用，也就是说，妄想是由这个心和心所组成的。
Now I'd like to read a quote from Nagarjuna's, I guess I'm going to read a paraphrase from Nagarjuna's Bodhicitta Vivarana. So a summary of a few verses. And it follows a verse that quotes what we saw in the Lankavatara Sutra about Chittamatram idam sarvam, all this is merely mind. And the verses say the appearance of forms, etc., arises in individual consciousness based on karmic conditions. But these are perceived in the same way as magical illusions and mirages. Whatever arises in consciousness is not as it appears. To see anything cognizable is a conceptualization, which is not how the Tathagata sees.
下面我读一下龙树菩萨的释菩提心论。这个跟楞伽经当中之前讲的一切都是心有相似之处，这一切的一切都只是心境。下面我来读一下这个偈颂。这个形式的这些外表都是基于业缘在个人的这个意识里面产生，但是这些就像我们看那些魔术的幻象其实是一样的，所有我们意识的能够识别的东西其实都不是它真正的样子。我们看这一切东西并且把它分别概念化，这其实不是佛来看待这一切的一种，佛陀他不是这么样看待这一切的。
Okay, so now this is a translation of two verses from the same text by Nagarjuna, verses 45 and 46. It says, a chitta, mind, that has the appearance, and the technical term is akara, of what is perceived and the perceiver, is not seen by the Tathagatas. Where there is perceived and perceiver, there is no bodhi. Devoid of characteristics and arising, devoid of states of existence and what consists of speech, bodhicitta is like space, and bodhi has the characteristics of non-duality.
这个是释菩提心论的第45和第46个偈颂，他是这样说的：诸佛皆不见，分别即其境，何处有其二？于此无菩提。第46个偈颂：无性亦无生，离有离言喻，虚空菩提心，菩提无二性。
So we'll come back to this idea about how that the Tathagatas perceive at the end of the talk, but it's not through false thoughts. It's not through any kind of distinction between an object that's being perceived and someone that's perceiving.
我们之后还会再回到这张 PPT，我们看那个如来他是怎么来看这些事情的。它不是通过妄想，也不是通过一个分别有一个对象和所看的对象。
So now I'd like to look at how Yogacara looks at the mind, and instead of chitta, they're going to use vijnana, consciousness, and the text that I'll be focusing on mainly is the Trimshika by Vasubandhu.
下面我们看瑜伽师地论当中对心念的解释，他现在没有用七塔心这个词，他用的是 vajana， 就是意识。我主要是选的世亲菩萨的唯识论颂。
So Vasubandhu, he looks at consciousness as dependently arisen, always in a stream, but in terms of three transformations of consciousness. And the first transformation has to do with a ripening of seeds from the alaya vijnana, the eighth consciousness or storehouse consciousness. And they also add this klishta manas, which this is called the seventh consciousness. And that adds a sense of self to basically every seed that comes out of the alaya vijnana. And like Abhidharma, it has the pravriti vijnanas, which are, the sixth consciousness would be the mind, and then the first five would be the other sense consciousnesses.
世亲菩萨他把这个意识分为三种，他觉得他们这些意识都是相互产生的，就像一个流，然后这三种意识分别是第八识阿赖耶识，也叫常识，然后就是说妄想会产生，就是因为八识里的种子成熟了。第二个就是第七识，就是从八识里面产生的想法加一个我。第三个是第六识，还有前五识。
So in Yogacara thought, there are three natures, or you could call it own existence. The first is Paratantra Svabhava. This is the dependent nature. This is basically the idea that everything is arising from causes and conditions, just like, we saw with the 12 links. And the Paratantra Svabhava is analogous actually to the false thoughts. It conditions a sense that the mind wants to look for something to be grasped, to be apprehended, that something will be an object, and that's the function of the consciousness. It's conditioned, heavily conditioned to do that. And if that we're fooled, say, by what appears to be something that looks like a certain object, then we're imagining the existence of that object. It doesn't actually exist. That would be the parikalpita svabhava, the imagined nature. And last, there's the parinishpana svabhava, which is the perfected nature. And in this, it's just the dependent nature, but devoid of the imagined. No kind of, you're not fooled or tricked by what's appearing in your mind. You can see it for what it is, and you're not fooled. So you don't grab hold, and yeah. But that doesn't mean that your mind is totally blank. You still have the conditions arising as long as you have, karmic conditions to go through.
下面要谈一下瑜伽师地论中的三种自性。第一种自性是缘起自性，也叫依他起自性。基本上它就是讲说产生的都是由因缘而生的，比如说12因缘。然后第二个是妄想自性，也叫遍计所执自性。意思就是说，这个心它总是要找一个东西或者是一个对象来抓，或者是执着。然后我们都被我们所想象的东西给愚弄了。我们所想象的这些东西，它其实是并不存在的。第三个自性是成自性，也叫缘成实自性，就是说它也是依据缘，但是也是依据因缘，但是它并没有想象这个东西。所以说第三种自性就是说我们没有被这个心所骗或者是愚弄，所以你不会去抓或者是执着。但是它并不是说这个心就是空的，还是会有一些业缘产生。
Okay, so there's a section in the Trimsika, or the 30 verses of Vasubandhu, that speaks about vikalpa, vikalpa being one of the words for false thought in Sanskrit. And we can read through it very quickly, and then we can summarize it in the next slide. The transformation of consciousness is a concept. What is conceptualized by it does not exist. Therefore, all of this is cognition only, vijñapti matrakam. The consciousness that has all the seeds reaches manifold ways of transformation due to mutual influence. Due to this, the concept arises in manifold ways. I'm going to skip 19. By which whatever concept such and such a thing is conceptualized, that thing is only a thoroughly imagined own existence or nature. It does not exist. The other dependent own existence or nature, on the other hand, is the concept, arisen due to conditions. The accomplished or perfected nature is the latter's always bereft of the former. So it's the dependent nature without the imagined.
下面我来念诵一下这个唯识颂里面的几首偈颂。第17个偈颂是：是诸时转变，分别所分别，由此彼皆无，故一切为是。第18个偈颂是：由一切种实，如是如是变，以辗转力故，彼彼分别生。第19个我就略过了。第20个偈颂：由彼彼变计，变计种种物，此变计所执，自性无所有。第21个偈颂：依他起自性，分别缘所生，缘成实于彼，常远离前性。
So basically what we were just reading is vikalpa, the concept, is a transformation of consciousness. It arises from the seeds in the alaya vijnana. It is analogous to the dependent nature, and it is that by which whatever is conceptualized is only imagined and does not exist. And it's cool, Stiramati in the Madhyanta Vibhaga Tika says something very similar. He says that abhuta parikalpa is that in or by which the unreal duality is imagined.
下面我再讲一下这个妄想或者是概念。这些转变的意识是从阿赖耶第80的种子里面产生的，它是一种依他起的自性，它不是独立的。然后不管我们所分别的东西是什么，这些其实都只是想象的，它并不是真正存在的。另外一个论师他也有说，这个不真实的二元对立性其实也只是想象的，不管是它本身还是这个对立性所创造出来的东西，它都是不存在的。
Okay, now I want to move on to a place in the text where vikalpa is equated with abhuta parikalpa. And this is in Vasubandhu's Madhyanta Vibhaga Bhashya. So it's a line that says, abhuta parikalpo grahya grahaka vikalpaha, dvayam grahyam grahakancha. So conceptualization of the unreal, that's the abhuta parikalpo, is the vikalpa, the concept, or I give you a few translations, conceiving a difference between or the presumption of a grahaka, meaning one who grasps, and a grahya, an object to be grasped. And duality means grahya and grahaka.
大概翻译一下哈，妄想，这也是世亲菩萨的这个论述里面的一段经文，意思就是说，我们对这些不真实的东西的一种概念化，这就是妄想。意思就是说，你制造一个分别，比如说你分别一个能执的和所执的，而所谓的这个二元对立，就是指这个 能执的和所执的，所执的就是一个对象，能执的就是这个我。
Okay, so here I'd like to suggest that things aren't what they appear to be. In a discussion on Abhuta Parikalpa, or conceptualization of the unreal, this is actually taken from a verse describing the Mahayana Sutra Alankara 11.15, but it's described in the Sakara Siddhi Shastra by Jnana Shri Mitra. And this, I'm grateful to Bhikshu Heyang, who is actually re-editing this text for his PhD dissertation. And he's in the middle of working on it and doing a wonderful job. And he's allowed me to use these two examples from the Sanskrit texts. And the examples given are, it's like when there's a piece of wood, but it's made to look like an elephant, or just a clod of dirt and it looks like gold. And how does that happen? Well, for the piece of wood, right, a skilled artisan has like given the shape of an elephant, carved it into an elephant and painted it. And it looks very lifelike. But no matter how real it looks, it's still a block of wood. It's not really an elephant, right? Same thing for the clod of dirt. Like it's painted, it's given this nice golden color, and somebody has used a mantra so that the person who's perceiving its sense faculty is altered, and they see not dirt, but gold. I don't care, like it's still dirt, right? No matter what it looks like.
下面我要讲一下我们是怎么样对这个不真实的东西产生一种概念化。这里我举2个例子，当然这些例子是从一个论师自己有的有形象论证论里面，然后有一个博士，有一个比丘和中，在他的博士论文里面呢，他还正在写，还没完成，他就用了这个例子。然后这个例子就是说，事情不是他们看起来的样子。比如说，这里有一块木头，然后呢，一个能工巧匠就把它做成一个大象的样子，还给它刷了漆，但是它还是一个大象。然后右边的呢，其实它只是一个土块，但是它看起来像金子。然后有人还开玩笑说，有人还用咒语说，我们那个感官已经变了，它就是一块金子，可是它其实还是一块土块。
So here's another example of this elephant to illustrate that false thoughts are like an illusion. This is from the Trisvabhava Nirdesha by Vasubandhu. And maybe we can read through these verses. Just as what is made by an illusion through the power of a mantra appears in the form of an elephant, the mere appearance, akara matra, is there, but the elephant does not exist at all. The imagined nature is the elephant. The dependent nature is its appearance. The non-existence of the elephant there is regarded as the perfected. Just so, the conception of what does not exist appears in the form of duality from the root mind, which is another way of saying the alaya vijnana. The duality does not exist at all. A mere appearance, akriti matraka, is there. The root consciousness is like the mantra. Suchness is understood to be like the wood. Concept, vikalpa, i.e. false thought, should be regarded like the appearance, akara, of the elephant. Duality is like the elephant.
下面也是世亲菩萨的偈颂。第27，如以咒愿力，幻照相性现，此中为形象，相则绝无有。第28，遍计如象身，就这个遍计直性就像大象的身体，依它为形象，根据这些那个木头啊这些形缘为形象，此时无有相， 为说原成实。第29，一于根本实，二取无而现，二取即无性，是故为形象。第30，根本实如昼，真如则如木，分别如见相，二取成相身。
There's another great example from the Sadharma Smriti Upasthana Sutra. It's like when a dog takes a meatless bone and chews it between his teeth until there's blood flowing. And he thinks that he's enjoying the marrow of the bone, when in fact what he's enjoying is just his own blood. But he's so greedy, he doesn't realize what's going on.
下面还有一个例子是《正法念处经》里面的，就像一只狗，它在嚼一块没有肉的骨头，它放到它的嘴里，用它的牙齿，它嚼那个骨头之间的那些肉，但其实它只是沾满了它的口水和唾沫的，从那些牙齿缝隙之间，他以为那个，然后他就流血了，他以为这是骨头的骨水，他并不认为他尝的是他自己的血。那条狗它就是因为这么贪婪这个骨髓，他不觉得他是在喝自己的血。
So it's the same with us. You know, we don't realize that everything that we are experiencing and enjoying is coming from our own mind.
我们也是这样的。Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, that's all.
我们也是这样的，我们并不认为我们所经历的这些事情，我们以为他们是真的，他们其实只是从我们心里面产生出来的。
So there's a story, a Chan story. The teacher was meditating with his students, and during the meditation, he opened his eyes and saw that one of his students looked just like a Buddha. So at the end of the sit, he told the student, you know, during the sit, I opened my eyes and I noticed you look just like a Buddha. And the student said, you know, I also opened my eyes during the sit and I saw you look like a wild pig. And the teacher said, it's because my mind was still that I saw you as a Buddha. And the implication is the student's mind had these conditions that made what he was seeing appear like a wild pig. Still in the mind of the perceiver.
下面讲一个禅的故事。有一个师傅和徒弟一起打坐，然后呢，在打坐快要做完的时候，这个师傅就对徒弟说：“你知道吗？我刚才把我的眼睛睁开，看你就像一尊佛。”然后这个徒弟也说：“我也有睁开我的眼睛，可是我看你好像看到野猪一样。”然后这个师傅就说：“那是因为我的心是寂静的，所以我看你是佛。”也就是说，他的隐含意思就是说，这个徒弟的心是是被卡住的，是有那个有条件的，是有因缘的，有为的。所以我们这个心 ，sorry, one more last sentence。所以我们这个心就是一个感知者 ，perceiver。
Now I'd like to spend the rest of the talk talking about what it would be like if we didn't grasp after something cognizable. So the Abhisamaya Alankara has a verse, Napaneyamata kinchit, praksheptavyam na kinchana, drashtavyam bhutato bhutam, bhutadharshi vimuchyate. Nothing is to be removed from here. Nothing is to be added. What is should be seen as it is, and one who sees what is liberated.
下面我要重点讲一下现观庄严论中的这个寄颂，它就是告诉我们，如果我们的心没有任何的执着，那会是什么样子的呢？寄颂是说，这里没有什么是可以被减掉的，就是不增不减，也没有什么是增加的。你只是应如其所见，然后见者得解脱。
In the Trimsika, at the very end, it's described as a non-perception that is without chitta, so mindless non-perception. And it's also described as a jnanam lokotaran, so a super mundane awareness. And that happens when that awareness no longer grasps a cognitive object.
下面我讲一种无心无念的状态，就是说，当我们这个意识心不再去抓一个对象的时候，它是什么样子的？它是一种无心又无念的，就是已经超过凡夫的一种意识。
Another way it's described in a verse in praise of Prajna Paramita is nirvikalpe, so free from concepts, free from false thoughts. That would be Prajna.
下面讲《般若波罗蜜多心经》里面的无念，没有一个缘，没有无相，也没有染污，永恒与不永恒，也没有变化，这样的话就有智慧了。然后佛，我向你顶礼。
And in Vasubandhu's Trisvabhava Nirdesha, we read, by perceiving mind only, chitta matra, there would be the non-perception of an object to be known. By not perceiving an object to be known, there would be the non-perception of mind. So you don't perceive the object, you don't have a perception of mind. And then, by not perceiving duality, there would be the perception of the Dharma realm. So if you don't get limited to just that one object, you see everything. By perceiving the Dharma realm, there would be the perception of pervasiveness.
下面还是天亲菩萨、世亲菩萨的这个论述，第36，只是觉察这个心为心，就没有一个对象是所可分别的。只要你不去分别一个对象，或者是知道一个境界，就是心境，那这样的话心就没有一个分别。第37，你只要不去分别这个二元性，那你就可以感知到法界，通过感知到法界，你就可以知道这种变虚空的这种心境。
So I guess the moral of the talk tonight is to try to see through the magic tricks to the conditions behind the appearances, and don't grasp on to the object that appears in your mind, because it's not what you think it is. And if you can do that, you can see the whole Dharma realm. And if not, mind misapprehends itself and continues its samsaric journey.
然后我们要看穿这些魔术表象背后的这些有为， 不要去执着，不要抓取，这样的话我们就可以看到整个法界，否则的话这个心它也会自己欺骗自己，误解自己。
So I have an image to leave you with from the Wizard of Oz. It's just like, you know, the wizard, he can conjure up all the smoke and mirrors and, you know, fire and the amplification of his voice. But then Toto removes the curtain and you can see what's behind all of this wizardly, you know, appearance. It's just a man pulling strings. And that's what we have to do with our mind. We have to see what's behind the appearances that come depending on causes and conditions.
这张图片也是一个好的例子。那什么微斗是巫婆是吗？就是那个像骷髅似的那个形象，还有那个什么火呀，还有那些装饰，你以为是一个很可怕的魔术，可是其实如果你看这个幕后是什么样子的，其实只是一些人在那里拉着那些线在幕后操作。这给我们的启示就是，我们不要被表象我们所看到的东西所迷惑，我们要看到这些事情背后的因缘。
Okay. So lastly, I just want to put a short plug for Dharma Realm Buddhist University. If you're interested in exploring these kind of topics like false thoughts and, you know, how to put them into practice, please consider applying or supporting the university and Master Hua's education legacy. And the last slide is just to say thank you very much to DRBU, Saugatam Sanskrit Buddhism, and the Ratnakara reading group for all of the things I've learned.
最后就是要感谢大家，感谢法大，还要感谢这个桑嘎他这个梵文的佛教，还有这个阅读小组，还要感谢所有的众生。然后呢，还要，然后呢，大家都来那个报名支持法大。延续上人的 legacy， 就是上人的信愿。
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Lauren. I think Yihuan has a question. Oh, okay. Or actually there's various questions. You can choose which question you like to answer if you like.
And let her.
Oh, wow.
Whatever question you see.
The root klurip, I guess, yeah, it comes from a very cool root in Sanskrit, klurip, which has a vocalic L. This is pretty rare. I think it's very interesting. Now, what its connection to time would be? That's a very good question. I've never considered that myself. I don't have any thoughts off the top of my head, but I would be happy to think about it and get back to you, Yihuan.
一环问我一个问题，是关于这个妄想哇卡帕的词根卡帕，它结，然后它就是说关于这个时间结是怎么定义时间的，他就问 Lauren 这个妄想跟时间的关系，然后说我自己还没有想过这个问题，然后我会回去，然后再回复给你。
Thanks for your question, Sarah. Yeah, okay, so there are a lot of steps, right, to trying to create this non-duality, mind of non-duality, or going back to a mind of non-duality from, misapprehending it to have duality. So the first, I think, key thing would somehow be to not perceive an object. It would be to understand that whatever whatever causes and conditions appear to have a certain shape and semblance of something familiar, you have to see that they're just causes and conditions, and not get tricked into using them to understand something. I mean, when we talk about grasping, it has a dual meaning, right? You're both kind of grasping after the conditions, but you're also comprehending it. You're understanding it intellectually. And when you do that, and it happens so quickly, then you're automatically just perpetuating the same conditioning process. So you'd have to somehow stop grabbing onto the object, and just training yourself to see through it, and not grasp. That's the first thing. Because when you don't grasp the object, then the grasper also doesn't arise. It's gone. It just doesn't exist. So the key is in actually seeing through that objective part. That's, in the very beginning when we're looking at kind of the ignorance part and the mind kind of tricking itself into thinking that there was something to perceive that was different or separate from itself, which is not the case. There's nothing. Then, from there on, the mind is just conditioned to have this grasping. And that's what the false thoughts are. It's a conditioning to see that there is something, some kind of object to comprehend, when in fact there's not. So I think that would be the first step. I'm trying to do this in my meditation, but it's kind of like an uphill battle in a sense, because my mind is extremely conditioned to just go with those objects, to take them very, very seriously. And I think it'll take a while to kind of train the mind to follow a different track, to not grab hold so quickly and to see through them. But I'm hopeful. I still think it's possible.
Sarah 有问一个问题说，有哪些步骤可以来摆脱这种不要有这种二元的对立，然后就客观的看，最主要的就是说不要去执着一个对象，不要去着着在那个对境界上面，要认识到这些现在你面前的这些只是因为因缘和合而产生的，所以因缘和合让产生在你面前的境界有一种特别的形，但是你不要被它所骗了，也不要用你所看到的眼前的这些东西来继续去理解，然后最主要的就是要停止这种执着这个对象。我自己也有在打坐当中来训练自己，因为我自己也是很有为，然后也是很较真的，所以第一步就是要训练不要执着去抓着一个对象，要客观的来看所产生在你心里的这些东西，不要被骗了，不要太认真。
Do we still have more time?
Yeah, maybe you can take one more question.
Okay. There was a question by Ling Feng in Seattle about, does that mean that we all share the same mind? Or do we each have our own mind, which we divide into duality? This is an interesting question. I've read in texts, and I don't know if that there would be different answers in other texts. It's possible, but what I've read is we all have our own mind, our own awakened mind, all the Buddhas, and even though that they're all like immeasurable, it's okay to have all of these kind of infinite minds overlapping. It doesn't detract from the infinity of those minds. So somehow it works in infinity, even though it seems like somehow that it can't have more than one infinite mind, but apparently it's okay. And that's really what our mind is. If we would stop grasping after these objects, that would naturally manifest. I think that's why Master Hua was so adamant that we get rid of the false thoughts, get rid of this distinction between something to be grasped and a grasper, and then you'll really see what's going on.
还有一个西雅图的林峰居士的问题，他是问，那是不是说我们所有的人都共有一个心，还是说我们每一个人都有自己的心，是我们自己把它分割成了一个二元对立呢？这是一个有趣的问题，我也有在经文中读到一些相关的答案，不知道可能在其他的经文中有不同的解释。它是说我们都有一个觉悟的心，它是无限的心，不相妨碍。
每个人都有无限的心，不相妨碍。
每个人都有无限的心，并且彼此是不相妨碍的。只要我们停止执取，那我们就可以摆脱一个能执和所执，这样我们就可以看到事情的真相。
Yeah, thank you very much, Lauren. Did you want to say the thing on your last page also about the dedication?
Oh. I could. I just mentioned at the very end that if there's any merit from the lecture, that I'd like to transfer it to all living beings, and especially to those in Ukraine and anyone causing suffering.
最后的那页 slide 就是说，把这个功德回向给所有的众生，特别是回向给乌克兰的那些众生，还有特别回向给那些让乌克兰众生受苦的众生。
Okay.
Barbara has a question. Lauren want to answer that?
Which one?
Oh, sure. There's time. Barbara asks, do you have any thoughts about the term drishti as view or false view in relation to this topic? Yeah, I think this is the reason why I thought initially that you could have a true thought because you could have the right view, or you could have right intention. And I thought, well, you must be able to have a true thought. But no, it's really interesting because you can attune your views and follow the path. But I think that the technical term when it comes to false thought, either as vikalpa or abhuta parikalpa, has to do with the kind of almost automatic habitual tendency of the mind to look for an object to grasp. So the conditions actually create a setup in the chitta that will split into something to be perceived and a perceiver. And that in itself is inherently false. That's not really how the mind exists. So in that sense, that there's no way you can have a true way of looking at that, because when you're in like prajna paramita, for example, you don't perceive other. You can still interact and engage with others, but the mind is functioning in a very different way. It's not perceiving the duality the way that we perceive duality with our false thoughts.
还有一个问题是关于 drishti， 就是临视点，他在问这个是不是就是跟之前他讲的正念，因为有妄念就有正念嘛，然后 drishti 是见，然后那正见正心，你要追寻 follow the path， 因为这个妄想其实它是自己有一个自动的习气去寻找一个对象，然后呢种种的因缘就创造了这种二元的对立，有一个能见和所见，这也是这个心就会这样的来存在或者运作。
所以所有的都是妄的。
所以所有的都是虚妄的，不真实的。
Lauren, can I ask a short question regarding the translation?
Yes, please.
the term Chinese use 妄念 or 妄想, and the English translation is false thoughts. What do you think? Are they good translation from Sanskrit?
Yeah, I would say they map onto Abhuta Parikalpa very closely, in the sense that the Parikalpa would be like some type of thinking or imagining, conceptualizing. Any of those, that range would work. And the Abhuta would be something that is literally non-existent. Like it doesn't exist. In that sense, it's not real or it's false. So that works. But because that there's a lot more to this term, Wang Xian, for example, like I think just the English words false thoughts don't capture it, whether it comes from the Chinese or the Sanskrit, right? Like, how do you convey the sense that your mind is splitting things into a duality that doesn't exist? That doesn't get conveyed by just false thoughts. It just sounds like we're not thinking properly and we need to somehow, think better or differently. But it's not about thinking at all. It's actually non-thinking. It's thinking or using the mind on our inherent capacity to know in a very different way.
So do you have a good translation?
We can translate while you think. While you talk.
Thanks.
最后一个问题是关于这个范文的翻译，还有英文对这个妄想的翻译是不是准确的？然后呢，事实上，它这个范文的这两个词对妄想的翻译，有一个是它是一种想象的，然后把这个东西观念化；另外一个的范文对妄想的翻译是不存在的，不是真的。所以它是有翻译它一部分的内容，但是并没有完全把那个妄想的这个东西翻译出来，因为那个心好像这样的话，就好像说我们的心还是在想，只是说没有正确的想，但其实好像是什么都不想，是不是？在英文就是达不到那个意思。对，英文所以达不到那个意思。我问他有没有更好的英文，然后还问有没有更好的英文翻译。
Okay.
Jin Yongshu, I don't have a concise translation, but I will continue to think about it. One thing about preparing for this Dharma talk, I really did learn a lot, I think, about the term that I wasn't aware of before. So these are really wonderful kind of learning experiences to try to speak about Dharma. You have to really try to, well, what do I know about this? And I think a lot of pieces came together that weren't clear before. And maybe in my meditation, something might arise. But at the moment, it's tricky, I think, to try to come up with a very short but significant way to render it in English. If you have one, please let us know.
目前还是没有一个更精确的词来翻译这个妄想。然后在准备这个讲法的过程当中，我也学了很多词，我以前没有注意的。然后这也是一个很好的学习经验，有很多那些就是分块，就是不完整的东西呢，都要整合到一起。然后下次我会想一个比较短或者然后很有意义的那个翻译。然后如果您有更好的翻译，也欢迎您提出。
That's the question that always bothered me, whether thought is a good translation or not. I don't have the answer either.
Okay, we'll work on it, see what we can come up with.
Thank you so much for the talk. It's really insightful and help us a lot. So, what do you think? You want to end now or what?
Okay. Do you want to announce the next talk or anything? Or We usually announce.
I can put up the slides, and you want to explain that?
Okay. So next week we have 下个礼拜 we have Doug Powers, who is also a professor at Dharma Buddhist University, speaking on the legacy of Chan, Master Hua as a Chan master.
下个星期是法大的教授果乐居士讲解禅宗之遗产宣化禅师。
So maybe now we can dedicate merit.
现在可以回向功德。
Which version we want to use?
English.
This one?
Yeah. Sorry. May the merit from this practice adorn all the Buddha's lands, repay the kindness from above, and rescue those in paths below. May all who see or hear of this resolve upon awakening, and when this body leaves his end, be born together in the land of bliss. 3 bows. Bow in respect to the Venerable Master. Amitabha, good night, everyone.
Thank you to everyone for your participation.
Thanks a lot, Lauren.
Thank you. And thanks to Jin Shinsher for translating and to the Vietnamese translation team.
他叫我了。